The wayfinding landscape is changing, so welcome to Endpoint's Wayfinding Xchange Podcast. We want to connect with leading experts, tech innovators, and key contributors to exchange knowledge and innovation in physical and digital wayfinding. We want to shape the future of wayfinding through discussion, collaboration, and shared expertise. And this is why we have created this podcast series. Enjoy the episode.
Hello again and welcome to the Wayfinding Xchange Podcast, where we explore the intersection of wayfinding and design in the built environment. I'm your host, Gideon Wilkinson, and today we have Lucy Smith, partner at HTA Design. HTA Design is a multidisciplinary practice known for creating vibrant, sustainable communities from the ground up. With a career dedicated to design and a passion for fostering inclusivity, Lucy has played a pivotal role in transforming spaces into thriving neighbourhoods that connect people and enhance the urban experience. Thanks for joining us, Lucy.
Thanks for having me. So I'm a partner. I've been there 22 years now.
Oh, wow.
And I run the communications and engagement team and also the interior design team. Mm-hmm. And we've been doing interior design sort of seriously for about 7 or 8 years. And that came about as well from narratives and creating place. We were doing some wayfinding on a project, and the client said to us, whilst you're sort of looking at the wayfinding, can you have a look at how the circulation spaces might feel to a visitor or a resident? And then they sort of tacked on could you look at this sort of co-working space and this amenity space and then this gym, and then it turned into kind of the whole building. So my job is very varied in terms of the day-to-day. I get to kind of jump around lots of different projects, whether it's, sales and marketing or bidding work or creating brands. We do lots of wayfinding and then lots of stuff around the community engagement. So working with residents, community groups, to make sure that they have their voice heard on projects. Quite often when an architectural project has gone in for planning, been submitted for planning, and nothing much happens, we're the kind of constant. So we're still communicating with residents, still reaching out to them, running projects with them. So we're the kind of bridge that kind of links between architectural stages quite often. So I guess that segues nicely into the practice. Obviously, talking about residents and engagement with residents. So would you say HTA's work is mainly in that sort of residential public realm sphere? That's your kind of sweet spot. It is. I mean, we pretty much only work in residential design. So that can take any form, build to rent, PBSA, co-living, lots of estate regeneration, some of the big estates across London we're working on. But HTA's history, and the practice has been around since 1969, was always embedded in working with communities. So even when we were a tiny practice, we used to take maybe an empty shop or an empty home, if somebody had moved out, and convert that into a site office. So we'd base the project team from there. So they had access, like direct access, readily available to the residents for them to come in and do co-design projects with us even back then. I think the sort of concept of co-design is, it's ever present in the design process, and people do go back to it, but it is really something that we've been working with since the practice's inception.
Back to this kind of question of inclusivity, which I guess interfaces with engagement and open communication. Is that, you guys take that really seriously.
Yep.
It's obvious from the website and your comms. So where do you think that's come from? Is that been influenced by those original founders and their sort of passion for community and inclusion, or has it come from them, do you think?
I think so. I mean, it kind of originated with that very early work of working with communities on site and designing places with them. I think we look at it more and more, and it's increasingly prevalent in the industry, with people who want to change the industry from the reputation that it has had into a much more diverse and welcoming space for people, people who don't necessarily have the opportunities through education or through employment. And as a practice, that's something that we like to nurture. We do lots of things around things like apprenticeships and training. And we sort of recognise that that's one of the things that makes our practice better as a practice. So currently we're 49% female. Our team is 49% female with gender representation at every level across the business. So that includes at senior levels as well, where we've got quite a strong partner team. The practice is about 240 staff at the moment, but we're made up of 27 different nationalities. We've got 56 team members from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds at the moment. So it is something that we are trying to address. We like to work with the communities where we're doing projects. So we'll always offer people from those projects work experience opportunities or training opportunities where we can. Or we'll go into schools and do kind of workshops with people around all the different types of careers that you can have in the built environment. So not just being an architect, you can be a planner or a landscape architect. We do lots of work with schools, try and have lots of outreach partnerships, and we've got somebody dedicated to looking at our outreach work within the practice as well. So it is very important for us, but it always has been as part of our history.
Yeah, okay. And I guess it's maybe a silly question, but how do you think that approach or that belief in inclusivity, how do you think that affects the work?
Yeah, I think the diversity of our project teams, you can see that in the work, where you've got different voices contributing different ideas. I think it's also really good for communities to see diversity in those teams as well.
Yeah.
You've got to try and break down the gap between a design team and the sort of perception of architects and communities. So what we like to do is make our engagement programs as participatory as possible. So getting residents involved in the process, almost having them as, a member of the team. And in some cases we have recruited from the places where we've worked before. So we've got some people within the practice who have come in for work experience, or they live on some of the estates where we've been working as well. But I think it helps to bridge that gap. And then you also learn more from the communities where you're working, rather than making assumptions about a place. If you go and talk to the people who live there, it's for the benefit of the project. When we do go and work on projects, particularly estate regeneration, we'll try and kind of break down some of those barriers between the design team and the community. So we'll do things like have multi-language translators there if we need to, or we'll meet with religious groups separately, or go into schools and do the groups separately there. So you kind of go and meet people on their terms, rather than assuming that, one thing will fit all, and really kind of trying to understand the community. Because ultimately, if you design something that they're going to live in, that you want them to kind of treasure it and look after it and nurture it and make the place successful after you've built it, rather than kind of reject it. So it's makes a successful project all round.
It's not just about communities being heard.
Yeah.
It's kind of trying to engage them in the whole process so they understand, I guess, why things have to be certain ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we try and make those as interesting and fun as possible. We don't love doing the boards in the hall kind of event. Everyone thinks they're boring.
Yeah.
And if you have to do, a couple of them every week, it's very boring. So we try and kind of come up with exciting programs of activities for people. There's a couple of projects that we've worked on where we've come up with some really nice stuff, like just things like printing a huge 1-to-1 vinyl of a one-bedroom flat with all the furniture kind of in. So then people came and you had people like lying in the bath on the floor, and just kind of tools that kind of make it a little bit more engaging for people, so that they can kind of envisage what you're trying to show them, what you're trying to design, but they're also part of the process, so they're more likely to be on board with it, support the proposals, and look after them when they're complete.
You mentioned before about Winstanley and York Road.
It's quite a big estate regeneration. We're looking at about 2,500 homes. And we've been working on that for about 7 years now.
Wow.
Working with Wandsworth Borough Council and Taylor Wimpey. The first phase was a tower block of private homes and a smaller building of re-provided council homes. And then in between that, we put in a new basketball court and worked with another architect to put in a new school and church as well that was relocated. So that kind of first phase unlocked the rest of the master plan to enable that to be built. So now we're in the middle of kind of decanting residents so we can continue building blocks. So the first building from that major master planning phase has just completed. And that's 126 new homes for council families. Some of the engagement that we've done on that, we've done creative engagement like planted lavender on hoardings, which we got kids to collect bottles. So it was kind of a recycling project. The site has a heritage of lavender field. So we thought it would be nice to restore that. We made a green wall on some of the construction hoarding. We've done various different art projects there. We just did a gobo lighting project where we got some quite small kids in the local school to do some designs, and then we projected them across the new square using gobo lights.
I know when we were looking at some work years ago around Elephant and Castle, and obviously a lot of the briefs we get through now, there's a stakeholder, there's an engagement piece. I mean, regardless of it being the right thing to do and a good thing to do, I mean, it obviously seems to become really important to a lot of developments. Why do you think that is? Is that because of the risk of bad press? I go back to Elephant and Castle, and you talking about decanting tenants whilst things are getting, there was, I don't know how true it was, but accusations of kind of social engineering and all this kind of stuff where people are getting moved out, private developers come in, put expensive flats in. So are you seeing local authorities, big private developers just much more sensitive to trying to get people on board to avoid the risk of negative press, I guess?
I mean, I think that the Haygate estate had a lot of negative press, and I think people learned quite a lot from that. We're actually working on the neighbouring project on the Aylesbury estate, which again is another massive chunk of Southwark.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been working with Notting Hill Genesis on that for about 13, 14 years now. Projects like that take a long time to build. There's lots of buildings on that site that, are ready to be demolished and new homes built.
Yeah.
One thing that we've done working with Notting Hill Genesis from the beginning is get to know the residents. And, right from the start, they'd had a lot of promises, those residents, right back since when Tony Blair took office. Right. And he stood on one of the balconies on the Aylesbury estate and, said all this is, it's going to change, and estates like this need help, need regeneration. And they saw us coming in, 20 odd years later as another kind of false promise. So there was a lot of kind of doubt, a lot of negativity towards us when we first started. And really our approach is, because we want the community to work with us, and we kind of need them to work with us really, particularly in places like Aylesbury. You kind of have to gain their trust as much as you can. And we've delivered some of the homes on there already. We've just designed a new library that opened about a year ago, which was designed with the community. They told us exactly what they wanted in there. And then we designed the homes above it, which are over 55s homes. And we designed those with the community. And we sort of managed to turn around some of those negative voices at the beginning. And they're now kind of on our side, and want the rest of the regeneration to happen in sort of full force, so that everybody else can benefit from a new home because of the condition of the existing stock and the fact that it does need to be rebuilt.
Coming back to our subject, that that intersection with wayfinding, I know when we've done kind of master plan projects before, one of the great ways or one of the more interesting ways of getting people engaged is through naming of new streets and squares and all sorts of things. And I know you've been working on that with that Winstanley project.
Yeah.
So tell us how you go about doing that, and how controversial naming can be sometimes?
Yeah. Yeah, very.
Yeah.
Naming it after people is always slightly controversial and a bit tricky. And, you can never fully check people out, their histories. And, and sometimes that does come back to sort of haunt you a little bit. For the Winstanley and York Road regen, we'd been talking about this for a long time. What kind of theme could we have for the new buildings and the new streets? And, it had this kind of lavender history. Battersea's got the theme of these bees. The Battersea bee is like their kind of emblem. We'd been talking about that. We'd looked through loads of the heritage stuff. We've got a heritage architect in-house at HTA, and, she'd done loads of research on the site as part of our planning submission. Anyway, we kind of settled on the sort of the kind of impact of women of Battersea, and sort of picked a few women who'd made really significant contributions to the formation of Battersea as we know it now. And then working with the council at Wandsworth, we discovered a local historian called Jean Rathbone, who'd written a book which was called Inspiring Women of Battersea. So we met with her.
Oh, right. She's still alive.
Yeah. Very much alive. Big character. And she told us about all of these women that she'd researched, and like just an absolute minefield of knowledge. And she was just brilliant and so enthusiastic about it. So we kind of worked with her, and we created some artwork that we put in the full ground floor of one of the buildings that had been built for the first phase. So these are kind of floor to ceiling, massive glass panels. And we featured one famous Battersea woman in each one of the panels, or not really famous. People don't really know about them. So it's quite nice to kind of shine a light on some of those characters. And then that went into the formation of how we named the first building. We sort of picked a handful of the names from the artwork, and you have to kind of check them with the council and the post office and all of that procedure.
Rules,
So got down to a short list of about 8. And then we sent out flyers to all the residents and got them to vote. And they voted for Braund Mansions, which is named after Elizabeth Braund, who, again, was quite a character. And she only died in 2013. And she'd been recognised by the Queen and given an MBE a few years before that. But she set up a couple of local youth organisations, one of them being Providence House, which is just around the corner. And we've done loads of engagement with that group of young people as well, various different projects like creating neon artwork for hoardings. We did a bee festival with them one year where they all created these cool bees and, all sorts of little art projects with them. But Elizabeth Braund had kind of initiated the setup of that youth club. So we thought it was really, really nice that her kind of legacy was recognised in the new building. Where some of these kids are going to be living as well. So
that research has gone to name a building. Do you think that concept will stretch to other? It
would be nice to, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the roads are slightly different because there is quite a sort of heritage of the road naming around there already. Right. So that we're going to keep quite a few of the existing road names that were maybe built upon and then uncovered. But I think for the new blocks, it would be really nice too.
And do you enjoy that? I know our team kind of love naming stuff.
Yeah.
But we have a team in Dubai, and they've started saying it's not our speciality because it can be really controversial.
It can, yeah.
It can take. Everyone's got an opinion. It goes round and round the houses, so it can take a huge amount of time.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of special when you've worked on something that will be there for a very long, probably longer than the buildings in some cases.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we do enjoy doing it. I mean, someone has to pick at the end of the day.
Who will it be?
And by engaging the community, it's kind of their fault if it all goes wrong. But hopefully it won't for this. I mean, we did do a bit of due diligence on her, and
no skeletons.
No, not so far. I think it's really nice to use to use female representation because you don't really get it that often in buildings.
Yeah.
There's tons of buildings named after men, not that many named after women. So it's really nice that we had a good selection as well. We've got about 15 on the artwork that we did. And they've all got interesting stories as well. So it'll be brilliant if we get to use more of them.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, we're quite lucky in the UK, especially in London. There's such a rich history always to kind of explore, and I guess you're pretty lucky as a practice to have a person whose job it is to do that, which is sounds like a good job actually.
The heritage, I think it's really interesting. She kind of loves all that stuff, so it's really useful research for us.
Yeah,
I mean, I think even when we're doing, our community engagement, our interior design, doing research on the place, not only like the heritage of it, but the sort of contemporary heritage as well. Gathering people's stories and, that kind of contemporary influence as well. And then working out who's going to be moving to that place if they're moving in new community. So what sort of demographic and what their, what the potential attraction is for them as well really helps us with that kind of narrative build. Yeah. They're
very interesting and very wonderful jobs. We always like to talk about the future of kind of wayfinding placemaking.
Yep.
What are your views? I mean, we obviously EDI's, I think, close to yours and HTA's heart. Sustainability's kind of almost become a given. What other sort of trends do you see? Or do you think that they continue on?
I mean, I think for us, working with communities is absolutely paramount, and I see more and more people doing that, which is brilliant, and co-design projects. I think one thing that I'm quite interested in us pushing even further is the sort of accessibility of place. So looking at, and not just sort of physical accessibility, but how spaces become more legible for everybody. So really kind of looking at certain protected characteristics and working with individuals on quite a detailed level. There's a project that we're working on in Roehampton called the Alton Estate, which is a tricky site just because of the topography. And we've just formed an inclusivity and access panel there, which is made up of residents. We've got about 15 residents who all have different concerns. We've got a couple of people who are in wheelchairs. We actually hired a mobility scooter and went on a wheel about with them to kind of experience it firsthand. Which was great. Although we managed to break the mobility scooter going too fast off a really steep hill. But it kind of proves the point that, these places are just not that accessible, and it's really good for architects and urban designers to kind of get that experience firsthand, where the dropped curbs are. And then there's a parking bay right next to it. So you're kind of blocking yourself in. The state of pavements, things like that. So we're working with that panel in particular to really kind of unpick some of those existing concerns and then make sure that the design reflects a better, more inclusive place for everybody. We're doing some work with an organisation called Make Space for Girls as well. And that, it's working with teenage girls, although actually teenage boys always want to get involved as well. But typically when you're kind of designing a public realm, lots of people just put a basketball court in, and that kind of deals with the boys. But the girls don't tend to use it. They sort of sit around the edges, and we got into some quite detailed work with them, just designing a bench, for teenage girls and how they like to sit, and how they like to converse, and then how that's different from old people and how they like to sit, and getting into that kind of real detailed stuff, I think makes places a little bit more valuable to people because you've designed it with them, for them. So I think a focus on that rather than just sticking a bench in that nobody's ever going to use or one person might use, one type of person might use.
So this route, this methodology, this way of co-creating and including community. How do you measure the success of that? Ultimately, another 10 years down the line is when you're going to see the fruits of your labour, I guess.
Yeah.
Can you collect that somehow?
I think clients always ask us, how are we going to measure success? I think it's important at the beginning of the project to kind of identify that with the project team.
We always ask them. Cause
yeah. Yeah, because they always ask us.
Yeah.
What I think that's quite a good way of doing it, though. What does success look like for everybody in the room?
Yeah.
And I think one thing that we always try and do at the beginning is set out the vision as well.
Yeah.
And try and document that as much as we can. And that would include those sort of KPIs. And then people, leave companies and move. And when these developments have been going on for, 10 years, you might have an entire change of personnel.
Yeah.
So it's quite good to document what you all thought at the beginning and kind of review that as you go. I think it's very hard to quantify the success. One thing that we do and we're doing more and more of is post-occupancy evaluation.
Yeah. So
we go back and talk to people a lot. And we've got kind of surveys and we do the sustainability stuff as well.
Yeah.
But I think lots of that is the kind of lived experience of people. What I'd like to do more of is the sort of pre-occupancy evaluation, which is kind of the engagement stuff early on, but almost without the constraints of the place or the finances or the development parameters or anything like that. So really kind of talking to people very early on about what they'd like to see from places as well. So different ways of kind of measuring it. Yeah. I mean, housing as well, if you mess it up, it's, it's quite a big deal. It has a big impact on people's lives. So, and I think each place is different, like there are some really interesting models where people have started to do sort of experiment with a few things like that. So you might have like an older person's building next to a student building, and the students can kind of earn points for going and helping out and doing jobs and things, or a nursery with an older person's building, so that the young kids keep the older people kind of a bit more active. And I think some of those different models are quite interesting to explore as well, but it sort of has to be in the right context.
There's a lot around the family unit in Singapore.
Yep.
And multi-generational living and kids helping elderly people. I think maybe we put too much on design as the answer, and maybe there's more societal issues that we can only solve so many problems, I think, as designers.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the multi-generational thing's quite interesting. I mean, we see that quite a lot in estates, a bit of overcrowding in some of the homes because grandparents might move back in, or kids, move away and then move back again. I think one of the things that we were looking with at some of the build to rent stuff that we've been designing is that you don't necessarily have to leave that local area. You can go as a single person maybe into a one bed, and then if you got married or got a partner, you could then potentially move into a bigger flat, and then you get kids, and you can you keep kind of going.
So you stay in the block.
You could stay in the same block if you wanted to, because it's got the amenity provision. It's got gyms on site. It's got screening rooms.
Build to rent has changed the big developers' attitude to community engagement, because there's a to me it seems like there's a real benefit for them to create community. It's a bit like we do loads of work in hotels. If you get a tenant in a build to rent, you kind of want them to be there as long as you can, really. Because if they move out every 6 months, you've got the cost of redeck,
the kind of churn. Yeah.
So it would seem an obvious thing to make that community and the amenity and the whole design of the place a lot more focused on community building, because you'd assume it would stop the churn.
Yeah, I mean, it does depend on the scale of the sort of project that you're doing, and the quantity of homes. You have to have a certain amount of homes to be able to afford to put in that level of amenity. But some of the bigger kind of institutional rental providers, I think that it does work really well in that situation. It's kind of the American model of containing all the amenity within a block or within a development of shared facilities. And I do think it helps foster some of the community. I mean, we're working with Greystart, Greenford Quay, which is just over 2,000 homes. Most of those are built to rent. And we've developed 3 buildings now, so just under 1,000 homes are built and available to be occupied. But when we started working on that, one of the key drivers for us was the public realm in between the buildings and making a successful community square. And actually we rebuilt the canal edge and put in an amphitheatre that leads down to the canal so that can host community events. And it's kind of all year round, depending on, calendar events or seasons. But they'll put up a big screen and put the football on in the summer or films. And there is quite a wide reach in terms of that community provision. And they do a fantastic job of kind of advertising that, not only to residents who live there, but the wider community as well. It's an empty site when we took it. It's a former industrial use. And there's lots of sort of 2-story houses around nearby. And it felt like a bit of a kind of empty site in the middle. So by opening that up and putting some retail in, some community uses, it's kind of extended that out into the wider community as well, which has been really successful there. And that's sort of opening it up a wider community to the build to rent amenity offer, not only just within those buildings, but across the kind of the local neighbourhoods.
Brilliant. Well, it's been a fascinating journey and conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I think it's one of those, it's one of the areas you could carry on for ages, really, because it affects all of us. I have to say, in our studio, we're very multi-sector, and when we're doing kind of housing projects, especially build to rent and kind of accessible in terms of price housing, it seems to motivate the studio more than doing some private island hotel. That's all very chic and great, but not really for the guys who are designing it. Whereas I think when we're doing accessible kind of housing projects, it's a bit more about them. Our design team, they can they're almost designing for them. We kind of love those kind of projects, but it's not always easy for us to get them. But anyway, lucky you. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to our latest Wayfinding Xchange podcast. Stay tuned for further episodes and feel free to contact us with any questions and suggestions for future episodes.